welcome everyone. Thank you for attending. We know it's hard to take time out of your day to come to these. Hopefully you find them useful enough that you'll get a little bit of information and then want to come back. Today's feature is interesting. We spend a lot of our time talking about what our product does, how it works, the architecture, and that's a very important part when people are looking at perhaps deploying our product. This presentation is a little different. It's going to talk about some features in our product, but it's more about what's going on outside our product and some of the concerns in terms of message storage and some concepts that are maybe not quite defined tightly enough, at least, so that everybody has really good answers. So this one is, we're going to talk about opinions and things like that almost as much as hard thoughts. So we're going to talk about unified messaging, and from that point of view, of course, we're pretty comfortable doing that because we've been doing unified messaging longer than anyone else. In 1989, we installed the first UM system, and while we didn't make much money in the early days with unified messaging, we spent a lot of time explaining it to customers. What we did get was a jump on the market such that we've had customers explaining it to us now for many, many years. We have had a lot of feedback, and we have more systems out there than anybody else with unified messaging, and we now have the most flexible type of deployment options for unified messaging, which is very important, particularly as we look at our target audience. This is some of our current customers, and some of these have been customers for 25 years. Some of these have become customers in the last few years. And as you can tell, they're all enterprise-level customers, and the enterprise has unique challenges, so many of them. I find myself sitting in a presentation with a large enterprise where they're talking about a huge project of upgrading their entire infrastructure, and our solution is a small part of that, and I'm very, very happy that I can focus on the part that I have because it's such a challenge between the architecture limitations, the data connectivity, the legal issues, the security requirements to make these changes that I'm just happy that I can talk about our little part and understand what that does. And the reason we do so well in these customers is our architecture. Starting out from the very first days when we released this product in 1985, we've had a three-tier architecture, which means we have a core application engine. On top of that, we have application modules, and underneath that, we have connectivity modules, which means we get to connect to lots of different things in lots of different ways. And that flexibility, that interoperability, is a key to our success because, as I said, the enterprises are very complex. And they're a moving target. It isn't that they're not going to change, next year, just like they're changing this year. So from our point of view, we've really spent a lot of our time making sure our product fits into the enterprise in a non-disruptive manner. In other words, we don't want to come in the door and get you all excited about our new and wonderful features, only to then present you with a list of all the things you have to change in your enterprise to take advantage of them, which is the case with many of our competitors. Because we're not owned by anybody in particular in terms of a phone vendor or a router manufacturer or anything like that, we really have targeted our solutions to be functional in any of the environments we're likely to find in an enterprise. So whether it's looking at the PBX you have today and knowing you may be looking at an IP kind of rollout in the next few years, or looking at your groupware today on site knowing that the cloud might be a piece you're going to look at later, or looking at custom solutions where you have data stored on your network in any number of places that might be helpful for applications and solutions. In all those cases, we're just comfortable going in, fitting in with what you have today, and then allowing you the flexibility to change without losing the functionality you're going to implement from our solution. So that interoperability and connectivity is a very important part, and probably no more so today than in unified messaging. So unified communications, great term, a lot of buzz out there all the time with all these things that people are doing. But the truth is, it's very hard to roll out unified communications. The concept of taking disparate systems made by different vendors and linking them together in unique ways to get more value, which is kind of the core tenet of unified communications, it's not easy to do. And as a result, a lot of times people buy solutions and roll them out only to find they don't really get very much use from them. They run into roadblocks within their own organization. They run into users who don't, very, very reluctant to change what they've done for years. So what we find is the UC dollars spend is perhaps not the happy money in an organization today in terms of people saying, yeah, that went well, let's do another project. But it doesn't mean that people aren't going to pursue this. It's very, very, it's just a powerful tool to be able to look at what you can do by improving communications. Communications gets more complex as people become more mobile, as there are more tools, as there are more solutions that do different parts of communications. The ability to leverage them in a way that takes advantage, beyond just each silo of application, it's very, very much something that people are interested in. And if you look at the most successful piece so far, it's unified messaging. By far is the piece more people have done, more people have been happy with it, and there's probably, it's probably not just because of what it is, but it's also because it's been around so long. We've been doing unified messaging, like I say, since 1989, and things have changed a lot, but there's been so much focus from the vendors on that it really is in place now, where the tools are there, the solutions are there, the productivity is there. If you look at unified messaging, one of the great boosts that it got was as everyone went mobile with their various devices. And this started with laptops and certainly into mobile devices, tablets, iPads, iPhones, Android devices, even Kindles you could do your unified messaging on. So the fact that there's so much more mobility, unified messaging now even offers more value than before. The ability to get all your messages in one place so that you can sort of manage, your communications when you're remote has driven people to really understand that unified messaging is a key component that you need to roll out. You're already supporting your users at their desks with all these wonderful solutions. You need to make sure that you give those same kinds of productivity tools out to users. We're not going to go through our unified messaging or even UC feature set today. We have lots of webinars. You can come and see all the different things we do. But what we are going to talk about is one specific element with unified messaging. And this element it's interesting in that we spend more time talking about the issues of where the message will be stored than we do about the features available in unified messaging today. And one of the reasons is, out in the world, it's gotten very crazy from a security point of view in terms of information. And this has always been out there to a certain extent, but the Sarbanes-Oxley ruling quite a while ago kind of brought it to a head, and it now kind of echoed through various other industries. And the concept is an entity, whether it's a healthcare organization or an enterprise, has legal requirements for archiving certain types of information and making them available. And those laws are really not easy to understand. They're not even laws so much as in some of them are guidelines. And so an organization finds itself in a place where it has to, do due diligence to be able to defend their habits in terms of what they do with e-documents. This would probably be a lot easier if somebody had just written the laws that say, if you put a voicemail in your email, then it has to be archived the same way. But that level of clarity doesn't exist. So now people are concerned about unified messaging is great, but if I put my messages into my message store, and we're going to use Exchange for this webinar, it's the most typical one we deal with. If I put it in there, do I have to archive those messages the same as I do emails? Are they subject to discovery? And there's no solid, hard answer to that, and everyone is kind of interpreting their own way. The most recent incident or kind of set of solutions that we've been asked to provide come down in the Link world, where Microsoft Link is a very popular choice right now for people to look at and deploy as a replacement for their more traditional telephony infrastructure. Link is very integrated. It offers a lot of interesting functionality, and a lot of customers roll down that path of Link and suddenly find themselves in a place where if they go with Link, the only phone system or the only voicemail call processing system that connects to Link is the Exchange part of Microsoft Exchange, and the only message store with Exchange obviously is the Exchange message store, which means if you're a company that does not want to store your voice messages in Exchange, you have a real problem going with link. Now, we're pretty decent people, and we felt bad for those customers, so we've solved that problem for them. We actually are the only other company that has an integration to link when it's used as a telephone system. So you can use either the Exchange message store or the CXE message store now, and we get a lot of business because of people that say, I've rolled down the link path, I'm happy with link as a phone system, I've started my rollout only to discover that we would have had to put our messages in Exchange. But if you put the CXE in, I see that those messages now can remain on the CXE system. So for people who've done their diligence and said, no, I cannot store messages in the Exchange message store, whether it's for link or it's a healthcare organization with HIPAA concerns, educational organization with FERPA concerns, an enterprise with Sarbanes-Oxley, or any of those other regulations on that prior page, we really are just an ideal alternative. Now, it would be a lot easier if this were a yes or no question where I want to put them there, I don't want to put them there. But it turns out, for some users, there's a real advantage in storing the voice messages in the email store. And for others, it's considered something the customer doesn't want to do. So the flexibility of being able to determine where the message store is on a per-user basis is another piece of our product that makes it a very popular solution. I always take healthcare as an example. It's a very easy one to understand. Within healthcare, there are people whose voice messages contain confidential patient information. It might be messages from a patient. It might be doctors describing lab test results. It could be any number of things. And if those go into email, when the voicemail is stored in email, accidentally those messages can get out. Somebody could accidentally forward one of those out to another email address, and that's very hard to sit in front of a HIPAA committee and say that, yeah, you think that architecture is okay. So healthcare, health workers, confidential information will not want to store their messages in Exchange. But within healthcare, there's a whole raft of other users who don't have confidential information, and whether it's the IT staff, the management people, any number of other users could really benefit from having the messages in Exchange. Now you get them in Outlook Web Access, you get them pushed to your mobile devices automatically if you're using Exchange Active Sync, you have cache mode on your laptop so you have them all with you when you go off net. So those people, to punish them by saying, no, we're not going to let any of your messages go in there, that doesn't seem fair either. So the solution for us is to sit down with a customer and decide on a user-by-user basis, where do you want those messages stored? And by doing that, we can protect the confidentiality and the compliance issues for any organization, no matter how they want to divide that down. Now, that was our first round kind of solution, but we're well past that now. We've done that to the point where now we say, okay, so I have a user. They don't want to put their messages in Exchange. We have that solution. You leave them on our server. And now those users suddenly can't get to their messages in Outlook Web Access. Well, that's okay. We have a secure web client. You can get to voice messages. And it's very easy to defend, like in a HIPAA sense, because it does exactly what a phone does. From that graphical client, you can get to your message. You can play it over the phone. You can play it over the speakers. You can forward it to another user on your system. You can delete it, but you can't get it out of the system. There's no forwarding it to an address or no file attachment saved. So it gives you the same feature set as does the telephone. And that's pretty easy to defend. The telephone with voicemail has been around for a long time. If that's the feature set you have on your graphical client, you're very, very safe. So we added that. The next thing is if you're getting your email messages pushed to your mobile device and you're not storing your voice messages on your Exchange server, now you don't get your voicemail. Well, we have our own mobile client as well. So our mobile client will do the same thing. It'll let the users get to their voicemail messages. They can play them. They can forward them, they can save them, they can delete them, but they can't get them out of the system. And actually those messages aren't even stored on the device. They're just moved to the device when they're played and then deleted. So from a security point of view, you can easily say, even if someone leaves that device somewhere, there's no harmful information stored on the device. Therefore, that's going to meet pretty much anybody's requirements in the areas of confidentiality. So whether it's compliance or confidentiality, we really are set up to cover those users. And the way we do this is with multiple deployment options, like I say, on a per-user basis. So what does that mean? For those people who do want their messages stored in Exchange. And there's a lot of people who want that, and that's, like I say, a very full-featured kind of solution. We have server-based unified messaging. So I can license a user for server-based UM. When we take the message, it will move that message into the email store. The only copy of that message is in email now. If they deleted an email, it's deleted everywhere. If they deleted an email, the message waiting light goes off on their phone. It's a fully integrated environment, meaning Outlook Web Access, Exchange ActiveSync, everything functions. So for those users where the feature set is paramount and there aren't the confidentiality and compliance issues, then that's how you would deploy it. For other users, particularly users who perhaps are looking at moving into the cloud, we offer that same exact thing. It doesn't matter to us where that Exchange server is, or Gmail in the cloud, or any server. It's just an IP address and a choice of protocols. It might have to be a secure protocol when it's in the cloud, but we have full support for all of that. Likewise, you could have a client who took their email client and connected to their messages even though they were left on the CX system. So now you have two inboxes. You have one that shows email and you have one that shows voicemail. This was very popular in the early days when people didn't want to store messages on the Exchange server or the email server, not so much for compliance reasons, but just for the implication on the hardware. Because you still can drag a message from that inbox over to a folder, which actually moves it into Exchange, this has fallen out of favor. This is one of the less popular types of architecture. It's still supported. Happy to do it. If you have a message or a user with a unified messaging license, they can be configured for this as well. Probably the most popular right now in terms of unified messaging architectures is the web viewer, or what we call secure unified messaging. And with secure unified messaging, we leave the messages on CX, you deploy our web application on one of your web servers, and it's actually going to allow the customer to play the messages over the phone, and it's going to stream them so they can't go file, attachment, save, and it's highly secure. And this is the one that basically duplicates the functionality of a telephone in the sense of, very easy to defend for any type of legislation issues. And as an option, you can send a link into the email that says you have a new message. And that message link can be configured. It's interesting, I've worked with people over the years now where this is a very typical look for an email. This actually says you have a message from whoever it's from, blah, blah, blah. And then in the body of the email, there's a link to the web client and a telephone number. So if you're looking at that from your mobile device, you can hit on that telephone number, call in and get your message. From a computer, you can go ahead and connect through the web and get your messages. But we've actually had customers say, I don't even want that indication that there was a message from that specific person, because I have to archive that message, and later on somebody's going to say, well, wait a minute, we want to hear this message from Donald Lewis that has to do with this incident we're investigating. So we've taken some of these templates and modified them such that it just says, you have a new message, and it has a link to get in and get it. There's no identity associated with it at all. So completely flexible how we go about deploying this. And then simplified unified messaging is really kind of an application tool more than it is a type of unified messaging. But our engine, our core engine, has a very powerful notification process where when you get a new message, we can call you, we light the message waiting lights, we can send you a true SMS to your mobile phone, or we can send you an email. And if we send you an email, it will be that same kind of notification email you saw before. And as an option, it can actually include a copy of the voice message. So now you have two copies of the message. One is in your email as that attachment message. You can delete that however you want. The other message remains on CX, so you can still call in and get it over the phone. They do have to be handled separately, so you have to delete both copies. So not ideal maybe for some people for a unified messaging type deployment, but both simplified, this method, and secure, this method, these are free. We don't license user mailboxes, and we don't license these two types of unified messaging. So you can deploy valid unified messaging throughout your enterprise with absolutely no cost. So a lot of options to choose from. the conversation tends to be about what people call the 5 C's: compliance, confidentiality, configuration, capacity, and of course, on every list for everything, cost. And we are very happy to have these discussions with you. The flexibility of our product makes it such that you just need to tell us what you want, and then we tell you that we can do that. And it makes it a very easy discussion. The discussions beforehand, where you as a customer decide what it is you need, those are complex. But once you've done that, our piece is fairly simple. But these kinds of projects where you're going out and trying to consider all these, and you're probably looking at 3 or 4 vendors, they get very complicated. So what we've done is built a checklist. And this is not a checklist about what parts of our product would you like, although we're happy to give you one of those as well. These are, if you're looking at unified messaging, what questions do you need to think about? What do you have to ask internally or externally to the vendors? What do you need to consider to make sure that once you roll this out, you've covered all your bases, and it'll get used, which is, once again, a very important piece of a UC decision, and that you can sit down later with your own internal legal departments and feel comfortable that you've covered all those issues that they would have concerns with by choosing the types of deployment for unified messaging. It's a very complex process to go through this. It doesn't happen quickly, but hopefully we've given you some information. You can, by the way, get that checklist from our website. We're happy to give that out. And we're to that point now where perhaps somebody has some questions.
There are a few questions. Thanks, Neil. And I actually forgot to mention at the beginning of the webinar, we will send out a copy of that checklist along with our follow-up email that will go out with the slides attached as well. So look for that later today. There are a couple questions. Neil, this came in at the beginning, I think. You mentioned voice to text. Does this transcribe the entire voicemail or just the first 30 seconds?
So there's a couple of different ways we do that, by the way. And this we should probably put a few more slides in this now that I think about it, because it has that same retention confidentiality content to it. A lot of people want to transcribe their voice messages into emails and have them put in their email box. There's 2 ways to do that. You can do it using an outside source, and we provide that option through Mutari, where you can configure your user's mailbox that when they get new messages, they go out. What it actually does is it transcribes the first 60 seconds of the message and then attaches the full message to the email as well. But a lot of customers, the kinds we've been talking about, who have concerns about confidentiality, security, are not happy to have those messages go off-site. So we also offer an option with on-site processing servers where those messages are transcribed on-site. Same end result. The user gets an email message with the first 60 seconds of the message transcribed, plus an attachment of that message.
Okay. And actually, I just realized I forgot to mention, if you have a question that you haven't submitted yet, there is the question box. You may have minimized it, so use that orange arrow in the upper corner, and then you should see the question box toward the bottom if you'd like to submit one. Next question, Neil. Does AVST offer any best practices for email retention policies?
You know, we very carefully stay away from that. And the reason is, these legal issues that we mentioned earlier, they're not really clear. In a lot of cases, they are telling you, the customer, to exert best practices and due diligence to meet the general guidelines, and then they're subject to interpretation. And particularly in areas like HIPAA, you might have an audit where somebody sits down and says, "So explain what your thinking was." Because it's not real clear, and because almost none of the people you talk to here are lawyers at AVST, we very carefully tell you what all of our options are, but we shy away from giving you any kind of guidelines in terms of what's required within your industry or for your organization.
Okay, great, thanks. Next question: can the system admin decide which users use which type of unified messaging?
Oh yes, completely. Because of the implications of this, and because of the licensing implications, we have always set it so that most features are enabled by the administrator, and then once they're enabled, we give a certain amount of control to the user. For instance, if you give the user simple where they're going to get a copy of their message, the administrator can turn that on, program that email address, set it up, and it's done. Or they can hit another checkbox, and now the user could maybe change their email address or change the gateway they were using, things like that, or turn the message attachment on and off. So it's always turned on by the administrator, and then we pass a certain amount of control to the user depending on what the administrator enables for them.
Okay, great. All right, well, looks like that might wrap up the questions unless someone's still typing. Just want to thank everyone again for attending. And again, we hope to see you on another webinar. We thank you for taking the time. Neil, do you want to close us up with any words?
I just echo what you say. We really appreciate you coming to the webinar, and give us lots of feedback about what you'd like to see and how we're doing, because that really is how we guide this program based on what people are looking to hear.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.